Don't explain yourself. The moment you explain yourself emotionally, you surrender authority. Most people are raised to believe that explanation equals clarity, and clarity equals strength. They are taught that if they communicate their intentions well enough, justify their decisions thoroughly enough, or explain their feelings clearly enough, respect will follow. This belief feels reasonable, mature, and civilized, but psychologically, it is deeply flawed. Explanation does not create power. Stability does. And the moment explanation becomes necessary, stability has already been compromised. People do not explain themselves because they are confident. They explain themselves because they feel pressure. Pressure to be understood. Pressure to be accepted. Pressure to avoid judgment, conflict, or rejection. The explanation is rarely for the listener's benefit. It is for the speaker's relief. It is an attempt to regain emotional balance when something feels threatened. And when explanation is driven by relief instead of intention, authority begins to leak. This is the first uncomfortable truth. Explanation is a response to pressure, not a demonstration of confidence. When someone is grounded in their position, they do not rush to justify it. Their decisions stand without decoration. Their boundaries are not debates. Their actions are not requests for approval. They speak once, clearly, and allow reality to respond. The person who explains excessively is not clarifying. They are negotiating their own authority in real time. This negotiation is subtle, but devastating. The moment you begin explaining yourself emotionally, the power dynamic shifts. You move from equal footing into a lower position without realizing it. The other person becomes the evaluator. Your words become evidence. Your reasoning becomes material for inspection. Your tone becomes a signal of insecurity or certainty. You are no longer stating a decision. You are defending one. And once you are defending, you are no longer leading. This is how explanation places others in the judge position. Judges question. Judges evaluate. Judges decide whether your reasons are sufficient, logical, fair, or acceptable. And when you voluntarily place someone in that role, you are asking for permission rather than assuming authority. You may still sound articulate. You may still sound intelligent. But psychologically, you are submitting control over your position. Strong people understand something most never confront. Power does not require understanding. It requires stability. Being misunderstood does not weaken a stable person. Being pressured into explanation does. Strong individuals accept that not everyone will understand them immediately, or at all. And they are comfortable with that reality. Their sense of self does not depend on consensus. Their decisions do not require emotional validation to exist. This is where identity activation begins. You stop explaining to be liked. You stop justifying to be accepted. You stop clarifying to relieve tension. Instead, you begin anchoring internally. You measure yourself by alignment, not reaction. You assess your choices by principle, not approval. You speak when it strengthens your position, not when silence feels uncomfortable. And when silence follows your decision, you allow it to remain. This is not arrogance. It is self-anchoring. Most people explain because they are afraid of how silence will be interpreted. They fear that without explanation, they will appear cold, rude, selfish, or unreasonable. But strong people understand something critical. Silence is often interpreted as certainty. It signals that your position does not depend on emotional persuasion. Silence after a decision creates gravity. Explanation after a decision creates doubt. This is why powerful figures throughout history spoke less, not more. They understood that words are not neutral. Words either reinforce authority or dissolve it, and unnecessary explanation almost always dissolves it. Every extra sentence creates a crack where uncertainty can enter. Every emotional justification weakens the frame. This does not mean strong people never speak. It means they never speak from pressure. They do not explain themselves to calm others. They do not justify boundaries to avoid discomfort. They do not clarify decisions to protect their image. They let time, consistency, and behavior do the explaining for them. The approval seeker explains how to regain emotional comfort. The self-anchored person remains still and lets reality settle. And something interesting happens when you stop explaining. People pause. They reconsider their tone. They adjust their behavior. Because they sense something immovable. They sense that emotional pressure does not work. They sense that urgency does not rush you. They sense that approval is not your currency. This is the foundation of power. Before we go deeper into why explanation destroys authority, tap like and hit subscribe, because what comes next reveals the moment. Most people unknowingly step out of power, not through weakness, but through emotional justification. Now, let this law settle fully. Power does not require understanding. It requires stability. The moment you begin explaining yourself unnecessarily, hierarchy shifts, not subtly, immediately. Explanation places you in a reactive position and elevates the other person into an evaluative one. Even if no words are spoken, the psychological roles are assigned. One side speaks to justify, the other listens to judge. And once that dynamic is established, respect begins to erode. This is because explanation signals uncertainty about one's own position. It communicates, my decision requires your agreement to feel complete. And the human mind responds to this instinctively. People trust what stands on its own. They question what needs defense. When your actions require emotional explanation, they feel negotiable. When your boundaries need justification, they feel flexible, and flexibility invites testing. This is why explanation attracts disrespect. Not because people are cruel, but because they are wired to read confidence through behavior, not words. Manipulators understand this instinct better than anyone. They provoke explanations deliberately. They question your motives. They challenge your decisions. They ask why, repeatedly, not to understand, but to destabilize. Each explanation you offer gives them more information. Each emotional clarification reveals more leverage. They are not seeking clarity. They are seeking control. A manipulator's favorite position is the judge's seat. From there, they can approve, disapprove, escalate, or withdraw, and explanation places them exactly where they want to be. The more you explain, the more authority you hand over. This is why manipulative people often appear calm, while the explainer becomes more animated, defensive, or emotional. The roles have already been decided. Strong people recognize this pattern instantly. They understand the critical difference between respectful curiosity and control-seeking questions. Respectful curiosity sounds open. It listens without interrupting. It does not rush answers. It accepts silence. It seeks understanding without entitlement. Control-seeking questions feel different. They carry urgency. They repeat themselves. They pressure tone. They imply that an explanation is owed. And most importantly, they do not accept answers. They only invite more justification. Strong people do not reward control-seeking questions with emotional explanations. They respond minimally, factually, or not at all. They understand that clarity offered under pressure is not clarity. It is concession. This is where boundaries are either reinforced or dissolved. When you explain your boundaries emotionally, you invite negotiation. You turn a limit into a discussion. You allow others to debate its fairness, necessity, or timing. And once a boundary becomes debatable, it is no longer a boundary. It is a suggestion. Explaining why you said no teaches people how to push harder next time. Explaining why you're uncomfortable teaches people how to disguise pressure. Explaining why you made a decision teaches people where to apply leverage. Strong people don't defend boundaries, they state them. This does not mean they are hostile or dismissive. It means they are precise. Precision prevents escalation. Emotional explanation fuels it. The more emotionally you explain, the more emotionally others feel entitled to respond. The interaction becomes unstable. This is why strong people separate emotional speech from factual speech. Emotional speech is revealing. It exposes motives, insecurities, and internal conflict. Factual speech is grounding. It states reality without inviting evaluation. Strong people default to facts when communication is necessary. They do not narrate their inner world unless it serves a purpose. They understand that facts anchor authority, while emotions invite negotiation. This is not emotional suppression. It is emotional discipline. Here is the key psychological law that governs all of this. Those who respect you don't need explanations. Those who demand them seek leverage. People who genuinely respect you trust your judgment. They don't require constant reassurance. They don't pressure you to justify every move. They allow room for difference without control. When explanation is needed, it comes later, calmly, without urgency. Those who demand immediate explanation are rarely confused. They are uncomfortable with not being in control. They push for explanation because silence denies them access, and access is what they want. Strong people do not fill that silence. They allow discomfort to exist. They let others sit with uncertainty. They refuse to collapse hierarchy by defending themselves emotionally. And over time, this reshapes behavior around them. People stop interrogating. They stop testing boundaries. They stop pressing for emotional access. Because they learn something quietly and unmistakably. Explanation does not move this person. This is how respect forms. Not through persuasion, but through consistency. Not through emotional transparency, but through self-command. Silence is often misunderstood as avoidance, weakness, or fear. In reality, silence is one of the most powerful psychological tools available, not because it hides something, but because it refuses to give others control. When you choose not to explain yourself, not to react, and not to fill the space with justification, pressure shifts. It moves away from you and lands on the other person. And most people are not prepared to carry it. Silence creates psychological pressure because it interrupts expectation. Human interaction relies on predictable emotional exchanges. Someone challenges, the other responds. Someone questions, the other explains. When this pattern breaks, the mind searches for stability. And when it can't find it externally, discomfort arises internally. That discomfort is not caused by silence itself. It is caused by the loss of influence. This is why silence feels heavy. When you don't explain yourself, you deny others the emotional feedback they use to orient themselves. They can't tell if you're offended, uncertain, angry, or compliant. They can't read your inner state, and without that information, they lose leverage. The interaction no longer bends toward their pressure. It bends inward, toward their own thoughts. This is how non-explanation forces others to self-regulate. Instead of managing your emotions, they are forced to manage their own. They slow down. They reconsider their tone. They replay what they said. They begin questioning whether they overstepped. Silence becomes a mirror, and people project into it. Their insecurity, urgency, or entitlement surfaces without you having to say a word. Strong people understand this dynamic intuitively. They know that emotional restraint does more than words ever could. They allow silence to stretch just long enough for the other person to reveal intent. A respectful person will pause, reflect, and soften. A manipulative person will escalate, repeat themselves, or apply pressure. Either way, the truth emerges. This is not avoidance. It is exposure through restraint. The discomfort people feel when they can't read or influence you is not accidental. It comes from uncertainty. Humans crave predictability. They feel safe when they can anticipate reactions and outcomes. When you deny that predictability by remaining silent and composed, you destabilize emotional scripts. People often rush to fill silence because silence removes control. They explain, justify, or escalate to regain footing. Strong people do the opposite. They let silence do the work. They do not rush to resolve discomfort that was not theirs to begin with. This is why silence is often mistaken for dominance. It signals that you are not emotionally dependent on the outcome. You are not scrambling to repair perception. You are not seeking reassurance. You are comfortable standing where you are. That comfort communicates certainty, and certainty commands respect. Another crucial element is time. Strong people understand that urgency is often artificial. Pressure thrives on immediacy. It pushes you to respond before clarity arrives. Silence disrupts this false urgency. When you delay response, or choose not to respond at all, emotional momentum collapses. What felt critical moments ago often dissolves entirely. Time reveals whether something truly matters, or whether it was simply emotional noise. This is why strong people don't explain themselves in the heat of pressure. They wait. They let emotions cool. They allow reality to settle. And more often than not, the demand for explanation disappears on its own. The silence exposes that the urgency was never real. It was emotional leverage. This leads to a critical distinction: emotional containment versus emotional shutdown. Emotional shutdown is avoidance. It is fear disguised as silence. It disconnects internally while appearing calm externally. Emotional containment is the opposite. It is full awareness without expression. You feel everything, but you choose not to externalize it immediately. Containment holds emotion without leaking it. Strong people practice containment, not shutdown. They are present. They are aware. They are emotionally engaged internally. But they are not reactive. They do not dump emotion outward to relieve pressure. They let it settle, organize, and clarify before deciding what deserves expression. This is why silence from a strong person feels different. It is not empty. It is grounded. It is intentional. And people sense the difference immediately. Silence used this way does not weaken relationships. It strengthens them. It establishes boundaries without confrontation. It communicates self-respect without explanation. It filters who is capable of respecting you and who is dependent on emotional access to feel secure. This brings us to the key psychological law of this part. Silence shifts pressure away from you and back onto others. When you stop explaining, stop justifying, and stop reacting, you stop carrying emotional weight that was never yours. Others must deal with their discomfort, their impatience, their assumptions. And in that space, power stabilizes around you. If this is changing how you see silence, pressure, and hierarchy, tap like and hit subscribe. Your support matters because it helps this message reach people who are ready to stop negotiating their authority and start letting stability speak for them. At this point, a critical clarification must be made. Never explain yourself does not mean never communicate. Power is not built through silence alone. It is built through selective clarity. The danger is not explanation itself. The danger is forced explanation. Explanations given under pressure weakens authority. Explanations chosen deliberately can strengthen it. Strong people do not avoid explanations because they fear vulnerability. They avoid explanation because they understand timing, leverage, and hierarchy. They explain only when explanation serves their position, not when it soothes discomfort. This distinction separates emotional intelligence from emotional submission. The first condition where explanation strengthens authority is choice. When you choose to explain, rather than being pushed into it, the power dynamic remains intact. You are not responding to accusation, pressure, or urgency. You are providing context on your terms. This feels different to others immediately. It does not invite debate. It sets understanding. The second condition is respect. Explanation given to someone who respects you functions as clarity. Explanation given to someone who disrespects you functions as a concession. Strong people sense this difference intuitively. They do not waste explanation on those who are seeking leverage rather than understanding. They reserve explanation for environments where mutual respect already exists. The third condition is leverage. Explanation should increase your influence, not dilute it. If explaining a decision makes your position clearer and stronger, it has value. If explaining a decision opens the door to negotiation, emotional pressure, or repeated questioning, it has already failed. This is why strong people separate facts from feelings. Facts are stable. They anchor authority. They describe outcomes, decisions, and reality without inviting interpretation. Feelings, when explained prematurely, invite negotiation. They expose internal conflict. They offer handles for pressure. Strong people explain facts when explanation is necessary. They do not explain emotional struggle while power dynamics are unresolved. They don't narrate doubt. They don't justify discomfort. They don't disclose uncertainty while others are watching for weakness. This does not mean they lack emotional depth. It means they protect it. Timing is everything. Explanation given at the wrong time weakens position. Explanation given at the right time resolves tension. Strong people understand that silence early often creates space for respect to form. Once respect exists, explanation becomes optional rather than demanded. An optional explanation always carries more weight than forced clarity. This is why leaders often explain after decisions, not during pressure. They allow outcomes to settle before offering reasoning. They let results speak first. Only then does explanation function as reinforcement rather than defense. Strong people also understand that explanation should never be rushed. Urgency is often a signal that explanation is being demanded for control, not clarity. When someone pressures you to explain immediately, it is rarely about understanding. It is about regaining influence. Delaying explanation neutralizes that tactic. Selective explanation also reinforces leadership because it teaches others how to engage with you. People learn quickly whether emotional pressure works. When it doesn't, behavior changes. Conversations become calmer. Questions become cleaner. Respect becomes procedural rather than emotional. This is how leadership stabilizes without confrontation. The most powerful explanations are short, factual, and final. They do not over-justify. They do not circle back emotionally. They state reality and move forward. The strength is not in the length. It is in the certainty. Here is the key psychological law that governs this balance. Chosen explanation increases power. Forced explanation destroys it. Forced explanation collapses hierarchy because it signals dependency on approval. Chosen explanation reinforces hierarchy because it signals confidence and control. One leaks authority, the other consolidates it. Strong people live by this rule instinctively. They explain when it benefits the structure. They remain silent when silence protects their position. They do not fear being misunderstood temporarily because they trust that consistency will clarify what words cannot. And here is the paradox most people miss. The less often you explain, the more valuable your explanations become. When people know you do not owe them clarity on demand, they listen more carefully when you offer it. Explanation becomes information, not noise. This is not emotional distance for its own sake. It is strategic communication. It allows you to remain human without becoming exposed. It allows you to be clear without becoming defensive. And it allows you to lead without raising your voice. At the highest level, never explaining yourself is no longer a tactic. It becomes identity. The shift is internal and irreversible. You stop measuring your worth by how well you are understood and start measuring it by how aligned you are with your own judgment. Approval is no longer something you seek. It becomes something that either arrives naturally or becomes irrelevant. This is the psychological transition from dependency to self-command. Most people explain themselves because they are still negotiating their right to exist comfortably in the eyes of others. They feel the need to soften decisions, justify boundaries, and narrate their inner world so they are not misjudged. But the person who owes no explanation has already resolved that fear internally. They understand that misunderstanding is not a threat. Instability is. This is where authority stabilizes. Let's bring the laws together. You learned that explanation is submission when it is driven by pressure rather than choice. You saw how explanation shifts hierarchy instantly, placing others in the judge position. You understood why manipulators provoke explanations deliberately, not to understand you, but to control you. You saw how silence protects authority by shifting pressure away from you and forcing others to self-regulate. And finally, you learned that explanation can be powerful only when it is chosen strategically, not extracted emotionally. All of this leads to one conclusion. Authority is not defended. It is assumed. When you stop explaining yourself, behavior around you changes quietly but unmistakably. People stop interrogating your decisions. They stop pushing for emotional access. They stop demanding reassurance. Conversations become cleaner. Boundaries become respected without debate. Your presence begins to feel heavier, not because you dominate, but because you don't collapse under pressure. Silence becomes your default authority. You no longer rush to fill gaps in conversation. You no longer fear pauses. You no longer feel compelled to clarify every misunderstanding immediately. You let time, consistency, and behavior speak. And because of this, your words begin to carry density. When you do speak, people listen more closely, not because you talk often, but because you talk intentionally. This silence is not emptiness. It is a certainty. People sense when someone is not emotionally available for negotiation. They adjust instinctively. Emotional pressure no longer escalates. Manipulative tactics lose traction. Urgency fades. What remains is respect, not forced, but natural. This is the paradox of power. The less you try to convince, the more convincing you become. You are no longer reacting to discomfort. You are no longer defending identity. You are no longer justifying decisions. You move with internal alignment. and alignment creates gravity. This identity does not make you cold. It makes you grounded. It does not make you distant. It makes you self-contained. You are still capable of empathy, clarity, and connection, but none of them come at the cost of your authority. You choose when to open, when to explain, and when to remain silent. And that choice alone changes everything. Strong people are often misunderstood early and respected later. They allow others to project confusion temporarily because they trust that time will clarify what explanation would only weaken. They do not correct every false assumption. They do not chase perception. They let reality catch up. This is why silence feels so powerful in their presence. It is not avoidance. It is refusal to negotiate self-worth. If this protocol showed you why authority is assumed, not defended, tap like and hit subscribe. And comment this below. My silence protects my authority. Because when explanation stops being your reflex, pressure loses leverage, and respect stabilizes around you.